Okay, good. Now we're
We should be
back.
good.
Good, we're back live. So Kirby, if you want to continue walking us through that draft 2.4 amendment.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thing. So Kirby Keaton Legislative Council here again. So where we had left off before was walking through two types of abatement under this amendment that would be allowed for land use change tax. We had gone through the first one, which is the more rigorous version for properties that are outside the boundary of a tier 1 area. And we were about to pick up the other approach to abatement under this amendment for land that's developed within tier 1 areas. And the number of requirements are a lot fewer. Two, so there's no limit on the size. There's no, some of those other limits aren't there. The two limits are the withdrawn land fronts an existing public road, and secondly, that it's for one of these types of residential housing developments. They overlap with the requirements from before. There's just not as many requirements. And if there's no questions about the abatement, then I can move on to the other things in here. Okay. Section 2 of the amendment has the changes to the definition for development when it comes to subdivision that we had gone over before. So as a refresher, this would change it so that when there's a subdivision of a parcel of land into 2 or more parcels, it will be development only if it's involving a change in use, is keywords there, right? On any of the new parcels that does not qualify for enrollment under this chapter. And it keeps that same old requirement too, that one or more of the resulting parcels contains less than 25 acres each. Just for extra clarity, that means if you subdivide a parcel under current law or under this, and you're going from 100 to 2 parcels that are 50 acres, it's not going to trigger this because you're not having any new parcel that's less than 25.
Representative Nelson.
All right, thank you, Chairman. All right, so you have 45 acres. And one parcel stays 25, the other one stays 20. The one that was 20 was vegetable gardens. Okay, and it stays vegetable gardens. And they were renting from the person that owned the 45, and they bought the 20 to keep their vegetable farm going. The person that kept the 25 says, I'm putting in 5 house lots. Is that gonna kick the 20 now into change of use? Because that's something we're trying to stop from happening. Because the 20 is staying what it was doing.
Under this, both those new parcels need to be re-enrolled within 90 days. That is how it's written.
Re-enroll that.
Yes. Now, in your example, it's just a matter of timing for some of this.
Okay,
Whether that subdivision is looked at as development, if it's enrolled, if all the parcels created are re-enrolled, and to re-enroll, they have to qualify. Which means if you're going under 25, it's going to have to be based on ag.
yeah,
Then you're good. That instance of subdivision, not development. Whether there's development down the road, isolated question, not related to whether it's the subdivision was development.
okay,
You may get feedback. If you do this, you might get feedback later from PBR saying that people are gaming it that way. They're re-enrolling it, but then, a year later, they're developing it. That was their plan, but they got around land use change tax in the first place. When they develop it later, that will be development, and that will incur land use change tax.
They only got around paying the tax for a year.
For that one instance, for the subdivision, they got away with, so to speak, the subdivision, but
it's always been there.
development later is going to be its own. It's going to be its own. It's going to be its own.
It's always been there.
It's going to be its own. 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 It's analysis.
And again, under that, I think under the scenario you described, they continue growing vegetables during that year, that was one of the conditions, right? That it stays the same.
What is PBR?
That's the department. Property valuation and
In review.
yeah,
Jill.
the tax division of the tax department.
They're there's a unit within PVR that is the current use unit that handles the applications and the administration of current use. Alrighty. So those are the parts of the change to the subdivision definition. Sure, I don't accidentally skip over other things here. I'm just double checking this to make sure, like, I'm not sure why I left these other subdivisions in. It may have just been for context for you. So I'm not seeing changes there.
We'll just back up to the first portion you talked about. Mark, the very first thing you spoke about. Oh, sorry, Chairman, I didn't ask.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, right,
All the way up.
to the very beginning of the document.
Right, yeah. So this is in order to. Okay, so we still have the tier 1A in there.
This one is outside of tier 1A.
This is outside tier 1A, and this is to be withdrawn. Is exempt from the levy of land use change tax.
This was, I think you were here when I think of one version ago, the department have asked for administration to make it easier for everyone, that it be abatement instead of an exemption. It was Representative Kimball wanted an exemption. That's just the way he phrased it. He told me exemption, I made an exemption. I don't know if it went beyond. I don't think he went into the nuanced thoughts of whether it should be abatement or not,
Sure.
but we changed it to abatement. So now it's abatement. We put it under the subsection for abatement that's in current law, which means it's restricted to ag land because that's how that's drafted in the first place. If you see up here. But in current law, there's two ways you can get abatement for land use change tax for ag land. We're adding two more here. The first way is to develop housing, inside tier 1, and the other one's for outside.
Forgive me, an abatement would mean at the end of the day that.
Abatement is when you go and develop it, and then the thing that triggers land use change tax actually being due, as opposed to just withdrawing it and having the lien on there, right? When you actually start hit the event where you owe tax, PVR can go in under the stuff we're adding and say, oh, you built housing, you meet all of these requirements, we're going to abate, which means you don't owe the tax. They're going to forgive the tax, is another way to put that.
And it's not that they would have had paid the tax and then gotten a refund later. It's that they would have not paid the tax and then at some point
Right,
told you don't owe this tax.
right.
Off, yeah, until you develop.
Yes, and then.
But you've already developed, sorry.
And that's from the part of me that wants to see our tax policy be efficient. Really thankful that this is how it works rather than what you're saying about people paying and then getting a refund and all that. No,
Yeah.
none of that.
Representative Lipsky, question?
Yeah, Chairman, thank you. When we had a discussion maybe an hour or so ago, there was some confusion and it had to do with where we focus on agricultural land as opposed to general forestry and agriculture.
Yes, yeah.
I think that you just quoted your word in your screen, so you spoke of agricultural.
Good, yeah, let's look at
And
that.
that's what
Yeah,
I
good.
meant
Yeah, right there, the line 8.
of what page.
Yeah, the highlighted part is agricultural land. It's
Page.
page 3, starting at line 7.
Thank you.
And again, this is the subsection on abatement that's in current law.
So, thank you, Representative Lipsky, because you may have flagged something that I'm not sure we were all catching.
It is, and yeah, maybe I should have gone into more detail there because it is that subdivision 3752 1A definition. Do you want me to pull that up?
No, I think, so I think the point here is that the abatement language is specific to agricultural land. I don't know in the original drafting of the language whether it was also specific to agricultural land.
No, that's, so last time I was here, I flagged that for you because that would be a difference between switching. We could draft a version of it that isn't like that.
Yeah.
Depends on how limited this to be.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Well, as a follow-up on that, we had a lot of discussion, you know, that when the state takes forest land in and there's a 10-year span when you have to implement management plan, this and it can change, but the state gets no return annually, whereas in ag land, they're getting so much per productive acre or a certain amount of income generated by the farm annually or a percentage, whereas forest land, the state gets no income. And we didn't want to game the system where someone just keeps forest use land and then decides to pull it out to develop it. And there was also, you know, it's an in-depth discussion, but it has to do with forest fragmentation and the forest productivity for housing and materials and the economy that are long-term ingrained goals in the forest current use philosophy of keeping intact forest lands. So that's why I thought those were factors in how we made that decision from my perspective. I'll yield.
I think I really appreciate your mentioning it earlier and then coming back to it because Kirby just noted that he had said yesterday we're going to flag this, and I remember that, but I had only remembering it now. So I think that it's a policy question and probably deserves more discussion than we've had so far anyway. So why don't we keep going? But go ahead, John.
Just quickly, well, we can remember Richard's example of that 45-acre field that gets split in two.
Yeah.
So if this passed the way it is now, both the 25-acre parcel and the 20-acre parcel could both pull out 2 acres for a house without penalty. Because it's
Well, to make sure we're not mixing things up. There was the subdivision stuff, but that doesn't necessarily relate with the abatement for this. I just want to make sure we're not getting that mixed up.
It's like 2 different sections of statute.
Yeah, well, yeah. The first thing has to do with what kind of activity means development and triggers unused change tax. And this is about abatement for certain activity. They're related in that that okay. This is about withdrawing 2 acres, not subdividing. I guess that's maybe the distinction that we need to make. Withdrawing 2 acres.
Using this example is confusing things. I'm just saying a parcel, 100-acre parcel split into 2. That's been ag, splits into 2.
Okay.
Can both parties in that case withdraw 2 acres for housing and qualify for abatement?
Following all of the rules here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. If I'm following you, that would, yeah.
And both could remain in current use too, right?
The rest of the parcel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Each is over 25.
Right.
yeah. And specifically what specifically the steps it would likely follow would be, first, the 2 acres are withdrawn. No land use change tax owed, because that's not development by itself. Then you build the house, that is development.
Mhm.
Land use change tax would be triggered, but would able to be abated instead of paid.
I'm just,
You're imagining a scenario, we've done two different things in this bill
yeah,
that are not related, at least on the surface, but down the road, you get a scenario where one of them, one thing happens and then the other thing could also happen.
right.
Because
I'm thinking it's sort of like cells almost, but when you divide, you both are eligible. So the more you split, the more potential 2-acre carve outs you could have, right?
And I think it's probably more relevant.
1-acre field, you're
Yeah.
only eligible to take that 2 acres out, right, without penalty. But the more you divide it,
If it's,
keep it the same.
if it's outside the tier 1 areas.
Yeah, exactly.
For the inside, this version of things does not put a limit on the acreage that can be pulled out. So I think that that's another point. I don't know if I've made it today, but I think we mentioned yesterday that for the tier 1 areas, there's no density requirement. There's no maximum amount of acres that can be pulled out and be abated. So it's quite generous about what can be done and still qualify for abatement.
Okay, good question. Yeah.
Okay, so returning to subdivision stuff, we went through that. And then we have section 3 of this amendment, which I feel like the committee mentioned they were still on the fence about this one, but the language is in there for providing 90 days when there's a transfer to a new owner to re-enroll, as opposed to the current 30 days. But those sections are in.
Okay.
It's in 2 different places. So there's 2 sections in here for that. I would also note that if you're considering the 30-day, 90-day thing, that because you were considering the longer time to re-enroll, I included in the subdivision language, here we go. In the subdivision language, I made that match up with the 90 days too, where in order to qualify for or in order to avoid being considered development with the subdivision, you have to re-enroll all the parcels. I put that at 90 days also. So if you decide that the transfer 30-day number is more appropriate, then you could consider whether 30 days would be appropriate for this thing too.
Okay.
And the 5th section and final part of this draft amendment 2.4 is taken from page 273, right? That Mike O'Grady drafted and I believe walked through with you, changing the definition of farmer in the definition section of the current use chapter. I'm sure you're all well acquainted with these different ways you can be considered a farmer, but this changes it. And I don't need to go through this, by the way, if you feel it's up to, would the chair like me to go through the pieces of this?
I mean, I think that what you've done is essentially just turn 50% into 25%.
For the income requirement,
Yep.
50% is changed to 25. For gross income from farm products, at least 25% of the farmer's annual gross income instead of 1/2 there. And then there was this new provision that was added there that said who earns at least 25% of the farmer's income from raising, it's like stuff related to horses, looks like.
That's what that word means, yep. I'm not sure why we don't just say horses, but
Excellent.
A different type, donkeys.
yes, right, it's more
Was
expansive.
that in there though to refer to the original equine?
Yeah, so, right, and we've, at this point, the amendment doesn't have any other language of that about equines, so, and we will talk about that as a committee. But yes, good, that's a sort of a hanging thread there that we need to look at, so is that the end of it, Kirby?
That's the end of it. I took that one section entirely. Did you intend for me to take all of the sections out of that bill, or?
I think that this is good. I trying to remember what I intended to do, even this morning. It's difficult to answer, so. I'm gonna just flag that I asked, JFO if they would double check, and they're working on that now. The report that they gave us that estimates how much, what the fiscal impact would be for some of these changes that we make. And they're going to take another look at the impact of this particular change because it had been rather high. So Kirby, I think what we'll do, and JFO, I think, can join us in a little bit, but it may be a few minutes before they can come in. I think what we will do now is thank you. I know that Forest Parks and Recreation has been listening in on the walkthrough and had asked if they could come back and offer some more testimony now that they have a better understanding of what we're considering. And so I think maybe we'll do that now. And then we'll have some committee discussion, and I will find you.
Okay, so you don't need me to hang around for a markup?
I would say if you need to be somewhere else, you're welcome to stay, of course, but if you need to be somewhere else, that's fine too. And as long as you're not too far away, we can find you when the time comes.
Okay, that works.
Okay.
Kirby, just to confirm, the version of the bill that we just worked on was the one that you're using this morning?
Yeah, draft 2.4.
Yes, Sidonia, that was the same one, I think.
And
Okay.
If the committee has changes, then it will be 3.1, but we're not on that yet.
Great, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Fitzko or Keith. Yeah, if you'd like to come up and do it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi all,
Hi, welcome back.
thank you. It's great to have another opportunity to follow up and be able to digest some of the changes to H134. My name is Keith Thompson. I'm the Private Lands Program Manager with Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation. I'll touch on a few things. I don't have the citations, but for the land use change tax, I'll kind of bounce between some of the main elements of 134. For land use change tax, again, supportive of a land use change tax that's transparent, predictable, implementable, and sufficiently high enough to effectively incentivize and focus state investment on working lands. And so we are generally supportive of the methodology proposed by Jamie Fidel and that Deb Brighton developed. Again, haven't run any scenarios. I think being clear or having confidence of its financial neutrality would take running those scenarios and understanding that. And I understand that's the intent, but how that plays out, is that done on a state level? Is that done on a town level? Things like that are questions that we don't know the answers to. And I think that evaluation and also the parcel evaluation. What does this mean for an individual parcel is something that as a landowner, or if I'm a consulting forester, I'd want to understand. That kind of would help check the box of predictability and transparency. I don't think that the way that the language in the bill yet addresses that, because it provides some authority to the best experts in the state to develop this, the land use change tax formula, but it doesn't make clear what that would be. And while we may have clear expectations about what we understand it intended to be today, that authority would carry forward. And so therefore the methodology or the formula could also change over time. And so then the question of, does this require rulemaking in the future, or what are the mechanics that need to be in play for effectuating this and implementing this? So those are some questions that I would have.
Representative
Sorry.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. Keith. I think for a lot of us, we like rulemaking better than statute because we can adjust rules down the road. Is that a fair assessment?
You are welcome to have that assessment. Yes.
Okay. Good answer. The second.
You're way out on a limb now.
Yeah, I'm like that raccoon out there. So the second question is, if we wanted to go ahead with 134, but you were on this new chart or so forth, if we put something in there that would be worked upon and reported back to us by February of 26 with, input from ag and forestry as to how it would work. Is that something that would help you sleep at night?
I would defer to property valuation and review. And I think that understanding the final language, is the more predictability and transparency that can be built in, great. The land use change tax has always been baked into statute. And so that has been a very solid foundation for everybody. We are in the process of updating the rules for use value appraisal with the current use advisory board for the first time since 1985. The statute has changed many times since then. So in terms of agility of rulemaking, there might be exceptions. And so I think that the relative to the next steps of, is this predictable and transparent for landowners, foresters, others who would be affected? Is this financially neutral? The question of, well, is there an easy out tied to this? It does feel like before folks can evaluate all those things, there needs to be a little bit more look at the details before folks can say, yes, it's neutral, yes, it's consistent or acceptable impact on private landowners. Once we've done all that and made those have a level of confidence, maybe we've got enough to just add it into statute, and that's your prerogative. But there's a lot of variables in use value appraisal, and to the extent that some elements that we want to be foundational and steadfast can be baked into statute, it is helpful because there's a lot of other stuff that we need to navigate. So that's what I've got on land use change tax broadly.
Go ahead, John.
Just to answer your question, Keith. So land use change tax has always been part of this program from the very beginning.
To my knowledge, yes.
And then it just changed the formula for how to figure it, changed once, and that's where easy out came.
I believe that there was a change early on that changed it from, if you were enrolled for less than 10 years, it was 20% of the prorated value. And then after that, it was 10%. I think there was a point where it added that additional criterion in, but I may be wrong. The biggest change was certainly going to the fair market value of the withdrawn parcel. So kind of stepping back foundational elements, the purposes of the program, conservation, preservation, future productive use of forest land, agricultural lands, natural ecological systems, preventing the accelerated conversion of these lands to more intensive use, equitable taxation for undeveloped lands to encourage and assist in preservation and enhancement of Vermont's scenic natural resources and enable the citizens of Vermont to plan its orderly growth in the face of increasing development pressure. Looking at the addition of the exemption beyond the growth areas, and I know it seems like we got clarified that right now the language would apply that just to agricultural land. That may or may not have been intentional, and so it does seem like it's a question. My original interpretation was that it applied to all lands, and so I made some notes relative to that. And the land use change tax is really important because it gives the program integrity. It deters casual enrollment of lands that aren't working lands. It deters casual withdrawal of lands that are working lands. It ensures that landowners who are enrolling land in the program are committed to working lands. That's the purpose of the program. And it's really worth an analysis, but in my experience, a large proportion of the land that is withdrawn or is excluded from the program is for homes. And so this isn't the rare occurrence or the exception. This is why the land use change tax is in place, is to keep working lands working, or to only provide this tax abatement or benefit for lands that are working today and have some long-term plan for that. What we see in forest land, and I'm going to focus on forest land because that's where our experience is and our expertise. A lot of houses get built on the flat part next to a road. It's often on the landing, and it's the only place where people can land wood from the back 100 acres. And there aren't a lot of options. And so people build a house there, and we lose access. It's only a couple acres. It's not a lot of land, but it has a major impact on the opportunity to manage the rest of that land. This is happening independent of exemptions to the land use change tax. This is already a major challenge. And so the question of, does this lower the bar further for people to put houses on working lands and create more barriers to being successful in managing our forest lands? I think another piece is people keep land out from use value appraisal because there's a land use change tax. They want to keep their options open. And they might say, you know, these 2 acres, there's no house here, but I'm not committed to it being working lands. I want to have options in the future, so I'm going to keep it out. So then the state gets the benefits of the taxes from those 2 acres, and that landowner gets the benefit of those options going down the road. If there's no land use change tax, and the most likely reason for future withdrawal would be to build a house, if they're exempted from the land use change tax, they might as well enroll it. And then there is a cost to the state for having that land enrolled that they're willing to pay as long as it's working lands. But if it's not working lands, is it worth the investment? And if it's enrolled, not only are they paying on that, they're foregoing all the revenue that they would receive if the land were excluded from the program. And so in terms of the financial impact, it's potentially some.
Nelson?
Thank you. Where does preserved forest land fall into this, Keith? We have two sectors of forest land. We have current use land for working forest land, but we also have a section of forest land that's in current use that's preserved.
Yep.
Old growth. So what's the difference? And I'm just asking the question because I like working lands.
Mhm.
Okay, but what's the difference in this? Someone enrolls it and then someday takes 2 acres out and builds their house, but they never cut the other 25, 30 acres behind them. And it becomes squirrel country because it's old growth.
Mhm.
I just, where's the difference? I don't know if that's. a
What's
fair
the
question.
difference between a house and
Well,
reserve forest
I
land?
know what difference is between a house, but people are enrolling land, forest land, and calling it preserved.
Yep.
It's not working lands, and they're still in current use. And I think they have a lower value on that than
No.
Same value.
same value.
And so, just clarification, Richard, are we talking about ecological reserve or a permanent, reserve?
No,
Reserve forest land is the new enrollment subcategory in managed forest land. So there's one umbrella enrollment category, managed forest land. And within managed forest land, there's a whole bunch of things. The vast majority of it is actively managed for saw timber, something like 95%. And then you have wetlands, also not managed for saw timber. You have ecologically significant treatment areas managed for the rare, threatened, endangered species, rare natural communities, water quality protection, things like that. We have reserve forest land, less than 0.2% of the enrolled land is in reserve forest land. And the vast majority of that land, if the landowner chooses, could enroll it in productive forest land tomorrow. It is forest land contributing to working lands. It's contributing to the ecological values, and it is a minuscule aspect of our land base today.
Thank you.
And so that's that question of how are these things in balance, though, is one of the most important questions we can ask, because UVA is about working lands, and we want to make sure that whatever strategies we use don't tilt it away from that working lands goal.
Representative O'Brien.
Just an interesting thought on this. So, but there's no difference if you're gonna withdraw reserve forest land or actively managed forest land, right? It's the same land use change tax.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think that question about which lands are we enrolling or which lands are exempted from this, and I think that question that was coming up with about what happens with the subdivision is an important one. The way this is structured is it's not every parcel gets the exemption. It's every landowner. Every taxpayer applying for the abatement gets the exemption. So if I wanted to take my abatement, build a house, exclude 2 acres, I could carve off a 27 acre parcel, exclude 2 acres, get my abatement. I sell my property, I've got the remaining 100 acres. They could do the same thing with another 27 acre parcel and they get their abatement. And then the next person could do the next one. It's kind of a Russian doll situation. It would just, every landowner gets the same opportunity. And so this is being proposed on the lands that I think we all agree are the most important working lands in the state. And when we talk about the threats to the forest economy and the ecological values that we get from forests, et cetera, unplanned growth is one of the most major threats that we're talking about. And there aren't a huge number of protections. Use value appraisal is one of the most important ones. And so it's not to say that we don't need more housing, but to create an exemption and just that reducing the modest disincentive to erode the working lands where there's a commitment and a significant state investment. When 45% of parcels aren't committed to these working lands goals, it feels like a hard thing to reconcile with the purposes of the program. And I'm focusing on the areas outside of the growth areas because I do think that there's opportunities, and maybe it's not the tier one areas, but having a targeted area where there is an exemption and saying, we need housing and we need places to put it. Yes, let's figure it out. But having a blank slate that can compound over time, we've got more than 1,500 transfers a year. Every single one of those new landowners gets a new opportunity as an exemption. It doesn't take long to have thousands and thousands and thousands of exemptions available to folks. Not that they'll all be pursued, but they're not being focused in the priority areas for development. They're being focused on our priority areas for working lands.
So thank you for that, because that was kind of. So if we kept in we talked about a half a mile ring around the tier one lanes, village centers, essentially. And we had a nice map up earlier of Fairfax. You know, some of that's in floodplain, some of that's wetland, some of that's ledgy areas, all the things you mentioned. Some of it could be a nice white pine forest. Fair enough, could be. And we all know white pine grows on sandy loam soil. And, you know, if it's within that half a mile section of town, it's a small percentage of our working forest lands. So are you saying that, you know, for the type of housing we need within that, we could be more amendable to it, or
I'm focused on there are the two exemptions that are considered. And I'm focused right now on the concerns we've got for the areas outside the growth areas.
the rule?
And then once if we're turning our attention to the exemptions within the growth area, we're more supportive of that. And I think being clear about where that is, and the 3 mile exemption was too much.
Too much.
Also why we think that the everywhere exemption is more than too much. But the focused growth area, you know, I think there was good testimony about, you know, how many opportunities does this create? Is it significant? I don't know the answer of if that's the right line to draw. I think it needs to be mapped. I think there needs to be analysis for which are the parcels, which are the acres, how many opportunities might get created here, and then evaluate it. And to do otherwise feels like we would have no idea what if we're striking the right balance and if we're creating enough opportunity. I think when the original proposal suggested that these occur exclusively in the village centers and something like that, it was like 190 parcels statewide. And we said, well, I'm not concerned about that, but I don't think that's going to get us where we need to go either. And so I only share that not because I think I know what the solution is, but I do appreciate that maybe that was insufficient to help create a contribution to the home opportunities to build homes in the state.
Representative Boswell.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a rural area that doesn't really have city centers and has lots of farms that have aging owners in giant farmhouses and nowhere to move either new generations of families or even other workers to work on the farm. I mean, I have a constituent who's in his 90s living in a giant farmhouse with a caretaker. And one day when he's gone, it will move to a family, but there's no other properties that are available and it's huge property and it's a working farm. There are many people, but they come to work on the farm. They don't live in the farmhouse. If we could have, I mean, and it's not anywhere near, it's probably 7 miles from the nearest town center. But would it be harmful if we had a very limited, the outside of the town centers on here, we have very limited, like 1 or 2 acres would be the most in terms of like, could we build something close to the farmhouse, but smaller? So the older farmers or the younger kids of the farmers or the new farm manager could have housing to preserve the farm community. Because the truth is right now, some of our farms are dying for lack of people to work on them.
Yeah.
And building in the city centers isn't going to help that. You know, I mean, we've seen even on this committee where we have people have to run and drive to their farm because the sheep are getting born and it's far away and it's hard. And if you can be on the property, there's an advantage to that. So I know that we need to find a balance between, we don't want to turn all our working lands into housing. That's not our goal. But on a limited basis, if you have a farm with 100 acres and you're going to transition 2 acres of it to make more housing, I personally, and I think most of the committee feel like maybe that would be something that would be worthwhile to consider, because it's not just the city centers that need housing. If we're going to keep our rural communities alive, our farm families, our farm communities, we need more housing in those communities. And they're not just tier 1.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And I think the fact that this is currently exempting or abating the tax on agricultural land, which has a unique need, and I'm not able to speak to that, but it is a need, and maybe it's a unique risk to forest land. That's where I want to focus my testimony and not speak for the agricultural side of it. But I do think it's worth appreciating that this isn't just about building the house. It's also about the parcel that's associated with it and how this lowers the bar for keeping lands intact, because there could be a significant subdivision of the agricultural land, even if only 2 acres is withdrawn, because this is only speaking to a withdrawal, is my reading of it. And I'm still trying to, there's a lot of nuance into how this would all interact, but that I would just raise that as a consideration.
Representative
I'm wondering if there's a way in thinking about what Representative Shawson brought up, if we could add into the language on the list of reasons for how you could apply for this abatement, if it could be in there just that you meet the definition of a farmer, so that you could build a house on 2 acres if you meet the definition of the farmer, which we are redefining just further down in this bill. Then you could build a house, have the 2 acres carved out, and have the abatement, but you're farming, right? If you're 25% of your income is coming from farming, then it's more likely that you are going to farm the land that this house is going to be built on, which is going to keep it in working lands. And in terms of forestry, I mean, I'm a sugar maker. Maybe that'll lend itself to that person being. I'm thinking about sugar makers who want to live next to their. I mean, I'm here right now. I really want to be in the sugar woods. You know what I'm saying?
You showed me your app. I know.
Exactly. Like, apps don't cut it. A house on the property would help, So there's also that when I'm thinking forestry and this same situation where, it might get 100-acre piece, might get a 2-acre house put on it, but that person might be a sugar maker. And if it's in here that 25% of their income comes from farming, there's a higher likelihood that that's getting to be working land, right? That wouldn't take a whole lot to put in. I know we don't have much time.
One consideration, not a recommendation because I'm FPR, but working with farmers pretty often, there will be some landowners with a farm who no longer meet the farmer eligibility requirement. And in the circumstance you're describing, building the home might bring that parcel back online. And so I don't know how that would be navigated, but allowing that former farmer to remain on that land while getting the land back to working seems like that would be part of the goal. That may not be satisfied by that strategy, but I think it does narrow the opportunity or at least targets the opportunity in ways that I think would be more palatable for FPR. I want to add one final thing, if I may.
Please, yeah.
Yesterday I spoke about the rare but meaningful situation where a harvest, the income from wood, removes a farmer from eligibility as a farmer. And including language, if you are proposing to reduce the eligibility threshold or the income threshold to be a farmer, including language that exempts income from wood or harvested forest products, timber sales from the calculation for to establish a farmer or designate a farmer, be helpful.
Do you have any language? Do you happen to have language?
Very
for that?
rough language, yes.
Thank you for coming back in. Any other thoughts or questions? Any other questions for Keith? And I think we all have plenty of thoughts. But we don't need to keep Keith on the witness stand while we debate it.
He's pretty comfortable sitting there. Does a good job.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
So just a sort of a check-in here, we have in addition to this bill, I want to remind you, we have the cottage food bill that we marked up. Katie came in, walked us through that, and we have a tentative vote schedule, some committee discussion and tentative vote schedule on that bill as well. And I think that bill is ready to go, and we can, I don't think there's a issue with putting it off a little bit longer, but we do want to do that. I don't know whether, is everybody, no one has said they need to leave or anything this afternoon. It's not my intention to be here all afternoon, but just want to make sure that I didn't miss something. Did I possibly miss something?
No,
Okay.
no, I just have a question for discussion.
Good.
And I really love reporting, doing a clerk's job. You got more action that keeps me awake.
Okay.
But I have to say, listening to Keith's testimony, there's so many issues that are brought up, and I'm not historically a can kicker who wants to delay and, put off to tomorrow what we could do thoughtfully today, but I'm finding a desire to deeper dive, possibly get more testimony. I'm going to share with the committee that I got a telephone call while I was driving to here about 7:30 this morning from a former commissioner of FPR who has been following some of this dialogue and urged some caution of, he wasn't requesting to testify, but felt that there's a lot to consider once we start exempting or tweaking current use. And I just hope this committee, if we want to act on, if it's critical that we act very soon on this, that we, I'd like to have more dialogue. I thought Keith Thompson brought up a lot of issues with regarding the working lands, and all the impacts. We're all concerned with housing, but fracturing or fragmenting some of the decades of gains, could trigger impacts that would be really deleterious for the working lands. So I just, I'm happy you asked for discussion, if I'm alone in this or what the committee feels is the best way to how we track forward on this.
Yes, Representative Superintendent.
I will admit in all honesty that I feel profoundly the same as you, Representative Lipsky, that I think that our committee has a real opportunity to produce something that is meaningful, impactful, and adds clarity, and also focuses the need to both address our desire to maintain working lands working, but also addresses the need that we need housing for those folks who are within the working lands community to continue working. And I mean that in a more expansive view of the next decade. And I think that we have heard such a variety of thoughtful testimony, but I think that that has only further instilled in me a desire to hear more in order to create something that is actually comprehensive, that is actually making a difference, because I will admit that I am feeling profoundly lost about what it is we are actually accomplishing in this current piece of legislation that is both meaningful and helpful to our goals of housing and working lands preservation. And I think that if there was one or two things that we could do today, I would be curious to know what the committee thinks those might be that could be helpful and actually have a meaningful change. But I think when it comes to the broader conversation of this, I do think we need more time. And I do think that we owe it to ourselves to be deeply considered in that process. And I don't want to cram something through for the sake of getting it out before crossover.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say thank you for that. And the crossover is imposed on us, and we have as much time between when we get a bill introduced and crossover to do something immediately. And it does rush things along. I mean, who's not feeling rushed right now on Friday afternoon at the 11th hour? And it doesn't mean that that the world comes to an end. We come back and we continue to take testimony, and bills that we don't pass out are not destined to be left behind. So anyway, I'll just say that. I'm not sure who is next.
I was just going to say, I agree with her that it is essential that we do something to create more housing. But I also agree with him. When people come in and discuss this with us, I get more and more questions in my mind. Are we doing the right thing by presenting this? It's happened so many times in the past. We see legislation today that we know didn't work. Was there due diligence back then, or did it get rushed through? And now we've got something we've got to correct again and correct again. So I see both sides, but I don't feel rushed.
Representative Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. We've added a lot to 134 from what it started out at. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I mean, I could take 134 right back to its half a mile around 1A, 1Bs. And I could feel good about going right ahead with that. But if we want to make it a more comprehensive bill, I had a discussion with Chairman Durfee yesterday afternoon about it a little bit, perhaps if we want this to be a more comprehensive bill and look at, 273 and make them kind of blend in together, or take parts from some and some new testimony we heard and changes we made, then we do it that way. So I can go both ways. And, it's at the pleasure of all y'all. If you want to work on it longer, I can. If you want to go to the original intent of 134 and do that one, then do another one later, I'd be happy with that too. But it's a little bit of a fun for you, but Rome wasn't built in a day. Or affordable,
How long did it take, actually?
suitable housing, residential housing won't be built in a day, but we can get it right.
Okay.
So this is one quick clarifying question on 134. It says, for outside of tier 1A in the 2.4 version. Upon application, the commissioner may abate a use change tax levy concerning agricultural land found eligible for use value appraisal under subdivision ... And then it goes into for land developed outside the boundary of tier 1A, and it lists, not more than 2 acres. So that means, are we talking about only ag use land and not forestry for outside tier 1A?
So, right, and this is the point that Jed brought up earlier. We had, and I think some of us are thinking that and some of us weren't. When Ledge Council made the change to address the issue of that abatement was solving, they picked up a section of statute that exists already that has abatement for ag land. And when he was walking through it yesterday, he said, I'm pointing out that this is only ag land. And, we said, okay, we'll come back to it. And Jed was thinking about that more than the rest of us, I think, and thinking that we had made a decision. I'm not sure that we had made a decision, although I will acknowledge that when the idea first came up, we were talking about farmers who were aging out and, wanting to build something on their ag land. I'm going to say right now, and I will say that I'm sympathetic to the argument of not pushing something through. I'm particularly concerned that we haven't through, and certainly not pointing a finger at anyone other than myself, perhaps, that we haven't had testimony on some of this from the ag agency as much as we have from Forest Parks and Recreation. And I appreciate your being here throughout the conversations and then, weighing in real time. Very helpful. Not having had that same input from the ag folks, I think I would want to, if we're saying, we're not going to rush this through, and if there's a feeling that we are, that we're going to, continue to take testimony, I'd want more input from them in a real-time fashion. And I'll just, while I'm speaking, also say that we haven't really talked too much about the equine section. And I think that's something else that I would not want to leave entirely silent. We were talking about that earlier, that there is a cost to doing, a cost to the ed fund that is measurable. In a sense, we had JFO give us that cost. There is an offset to that cost that is harder to measure, that also shouldn't be denied and needs to be acknowledged. But as it stands right now, I know that our colleagues in Ways and Means are not prepared to give any consideration of any real consideration to a bill that increases the ed fund next year. And, a property may be built, but they wouldn't want to be doing that. So anyway, those are some of the things that I've been sort of thinking about as well. Yeah, I mean, I will, I know I've said this before and maybe it hasn't been, and I've said it more than once, but I will say again, what they are really interested in, and it's going to be difficult, I think, no matter how long our session goes. They're interested in ideas that, ways that we can somehow find to reduce property taxes for everyone by lowering that current use total figure that currently stands at $55 million to the ed fund. And I'm not entirely confident that there is a way to do that, but yeah, okay.
Could I still, from what I'm hearing, sounds like we're not gonna vote on H-134 today, most likely. What about the possibility of simply making a change to current use that changes that 50% of income for farmers to 25%?
So,
Which I know.
Yeah.
Also, but I feel like our committee does represent agriculture, food resiliency, and forestry, right? So I think we have, that is the hat that we wear. And we can let another committee figure out whether or not it's a feasible thing. That doesn't mean we don't But in my mind,
Yeah, yeah.
that we can put that out of our committee and let them decide on the financial end of it.
You
In the
know,
best interest of our, but I mean, I'm new to this game, so.
yeah, and aptly put. And I am extremely sympathetic to, in general, the way you just, positioned it. We, each of our committees has an area of jurisdiction. We're not that we are, representatives of those, of the, businesses or industries or the sectors that are in our title. We're not their representatives, but we are here to work on the issues that relate to them. So I am sympathetic to it. In this particular instance, I'm not sure that it works to our advantage to do what you just suggested. Although again, I'm very sympathetic to it. So
It's possible that we could have certain current use amendments to the Senate miscellaneous ag too. So we might be able to pick it up there, and same with your issue, John, I think. But
I was keeping that secret.
yeah, no, actually, I'm glad that you mentioned it because
Christmas tree.
it's not, it's not as though it's the end of 2025.
Not the end of the water.
Here's what I'll suggest. Let's take a short break, and I'm gonna see if Katie is available to talk to, and then we can come back and regroup, and this conversation doesn't have to be over, but it sounds like we're again, I have my opinion as the chair. It carries a little more weight than everyone else's, but I would like to have, and I really appreciate the committee's input on this as well. And, recognizing that finding that elusive consensus isn't always easy to do. But I think to have thought 3 weeks ago that any of us would have as much understanding of the current youth program as I feel like we do today is, if nothing else, quite an accomplishment. And I think that we, our thanks to everyone who's testified about it, but I think they'll also say the same thing if you ask.
Much more complex than I thought.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about it except the name. Now at least I know about 10% what it's all about.
All right, let's take a short break. Sidonia, I don't know if you can hear us, but let's take a break.
Sidonia's frozen.
I see that.
He's sleeping.